Hey, good morning, everyone. Lee Jandro here with Abundant Grace Fellowship. And this morning we're going to take some time and investigate what do we do when people indicate that they hate us? Uh, how do we respond? If we're believers, just the other day I had a conversation with someone about turning the other cheek. So that's what we're going to talk about this morning. And I want to share a few scriptures with you to begin this. And I just looked down and realized I was a minute early. So I do apologize. But one of the scriptures that I rely on in my own personal life comes from the book of Luke. And it says, "But to those of you who will listen, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you." And so right now, people have already begun to struggle, perhaps. I remember the very first message I preached in a fellowship that my wife and I started in Springfield. It was on anger, and we had one visitor. And that one visitor heard me talk about this. She gently got up out of her chair. She walked off. And every time I saw her after that, walking on the streets of Springfield, she would give me this look like, really, I don't even need to be around people like you. You don't know what people have done to me. And so another scripture that comes up is also in the book of Luke. It says, bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. And then finally, I'll share this one. It says, then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And they divided up his garments by casting lots. And that's found in the book of John. So why talk about this? I think if we're sincere in our approach to this, we realize that lots of people are in the midst of division. Left versus right, red versus blue, gay versus not gay, race versus white, all those things. So before I jump into this a little more, I just want to tell you that at the end of the service, I'm going to take communion, and you're welcome to join me. If you're someone who wants to take it before we start, you're welcome to do that. The bread, the cracker, the juice, the wine, whatever it is. I would encourage you to take communion because not only does it remind you, the cross to me always represents the vertical place between me and Jesus. But I also understand that there's this horizontal thing that represents not only his body, but what he means to me, how he came and he took on humanity into his own being, into his own body. And so taking communion is not just a reflective thing, it's a powerful thing to me. And I would encourage you, if you've not taken communion in a while or you don't believe in it, maybe just this morning, take an act of faith. Go get a cup of juice or whatever you have, get a piece of bread, take it. Because if we're going to talk about blessing those who hate us, we're going to struggle if we don't have something to tie into. And that tying into, for me, and for millions and millions of others, is to take communion, to remind us, but also to empower us to love those who are not as loving towards us. And the other piece that I just want to share in the comments, or in the comments section, I guess that's what we call it. If you're interested in giving into our ministry, just this morning I received I placed a post up in our fellowship group, and I have this friend. She's in her 70s. She's been on the mission field forever, and she had a problem with her vehicle. Now, you have to understand that while she does fly, when she goes to Uganda, she flies. When she goes to Cuba, she flies. But when she goes to Guatemala and Belize, she drives from the United States all the way through Mexico by herself. A single white woman who has faithfully traveled year after year after year. And I've known her in my own personal life since 1997. And she was on the mission field before that. She's a missionary who lives where she is. And I'm not minimizing, because I have another friend who goes on the mission field every month in a different country, and has since he was 21 years old, and he's well into his 70s. And every month he travels, and he goes there and he does what he needs to do. But my friend, this woman friend of ours, she she travels by vehicle, and she just got this new vehicle. Anyways, it cropped up some problems, and she, she ended her post of having no money, a vehicle that was broken down, and having to trust in God with, "Let the journey begin." And as long as I've known her, she's tugged into her faith, held on to the things of God, and managed to go some of the most traumatic, tumultuous, adventure-filled times that anyone could probably imagine. So part of when you give to us, you give to those that are on the mission field, you give to those that are homeless, you give to those that are struggling with addictions, and the ministries that work with them. So I want to let you know that. I don't want you to think that, when you give, it's just, we always ought to give unto the Lord, if you will. And the Bible says when you give cheerfully. So we encourage cheerful giving. But I just want to share that with you. Why do they hate us? There's a lot of things that come out of that. And, you know, I, over the last week, I was reading this survey that took place. And the survey was entitled "The Self-Awareness Gap," or, what do non-Christian people really think about the church? Yesterday, I had my birthday party. I turned 66. I had friends here. I had members of my family here. I had people here who don't come to church. I had people here who don't believe in God. And and yet I've determined in my life that I'm going to be a living example of the goodness of God. Some days I might say, even if it kills me. And and so I read this article the other day, and it really struck me as I read through the survey. Now, I consider myself an extremely blessed man because the Lord blesses me. But yesterday, this shirt that I wear today, this is a friend of mine's shirt who, after he passed away, it was given on to me. His wife said, "I know you love that shirt, and I know you love my husband." And I wear this with honor. And I don't wear it often because I don't ever want to wear it out, but I wear it because of my friend. And his wife wrote me, and I've known her since the mid 90s, knew both her and her husband since the mid 90s, and she sent me this letter. And another gentleman who came into my life in 92, a prophetic voice, the first person to open up the gospel of grace to me in a legalistic situation in a crazy time in my life. He wrote me a nice little note. Another friend of mine, the missionary who I just mentioned, who's on the field in Belize, my friend, uh, my 70-year-old plus lady friend, and then another friend of mine who I just mentioned goes on the mission field. They all wrote me these sweet little letters. And then I had a bunch of messages from people who don't practice Christianity. And they were really kind, and they really stirred my heart. And my heart is stirred because I believe that it's necessary that we determine what is the mission of God, not what is our mission, not what is our church mission, but what is the mission of God. And I believe the mission of God in my life is to represent. I don't like that word represent, but it does say we're ambassadors. And why I say represent, because that always sounds like you're doing something because you have to. But I'm an ambassador of the King of Kings. And I want to walk in that. And I'm really cautious and very careful about my walk in that area. I want to walk, if you will, circumspect. The New Testament, Paul uses those words, that we would walk circumspectly. And so I look at those scriptures and I think about Jesus and I think about, Father, forgive them. In the midst of all that, I want to make sure that I am a Father, forgive them, that I walk in forgiveness, that I can be like Stephen as he was stoned to death, that I could stand there and say in all sincerity of heart, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And so as I looked at this survey the other day, I think one of the greatest deceptions, and I talk about it frequently, but I'm going to bring it up again, is that often we only hang out with people we like. We only hang out with people who speak our language. Um, just today, I saw this post about being in my tribe. And that starts to stretch my mission versus God's mission. Because when I only look at the people that tell me what I want to hear, or I only listen to the things that make me feel good, I'm going to struggle. And I'm going to struggle when I'm confronted by things that don't line up with my thinking. You've heard me talk many, many times, and many people do it much better with their dissertations about cognitive dissonance and those kind of things. In simplified form, I hear something, I don't agree with it, so I want to reject it. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, they heard something, it didn't agree with what they wanted, so they rejected it to the point of death of Christ the King. So I looked at this survey, and I want to give you my heart on this. First and foremost, being aware of our circumstance, our situation, is critical. Self-awareness of who we are and why we are is powerful. You know, there's a band that I've known since 1997, and they're called Recycle Percussion, and I'm a drummer, so it matches my heartbeat, no pun intended. But recently they opened a store, they do a TV show called Chaos and Kindness, and they just recently opened their second retail shop here in the community that I live in, and it's called Chaos and Kindness, and their motto, if you will, is in the midst of chaos, let there be kindness. And I think it's a testimony not just to our community, but to us becoming aware of who we are. I have as much power to damage somebody with my words as I do to lift them up. A friend of mine blessed me the other day when he said, I have learned from you to take a deep breath, take a pause, and not respond to the first round of information that is being yelled at me or fired at me or sent at me. And I took that to say, wow, he's come a long way. But I also realized I've come a long way in that. Forgiveness is key in my life. Being forgiven, I fully understand the fullness. Well, I don't fully understand, but I graciously understand the measure of forgiveness that I have received. And I am determined to put that out into the atmosphere, to put that out into lives. Just the other day, I posted an article, and it was about that acts of kindness make you feel better. That when you give money to somebody or you give money to something, you know, there are things that come across my desktop that there is a resistance in me to give into their GoFundMes. And then I go, I haven't grown enough. I've grown a lot, but I haven't grown enough. And I send money. Happened just this past week. So what do non-Christian people really think about us? If we do not understand what people think about us, we will not be able to grow. If we only listen to those that speak our political thought process or our churchiana thought process or whatever those are, we're going to struggle. My grandson and I listen to this comedian. His name's John Crist. And if you know him, I think he's hilarious. Um, I think he's really, you know, he was a PK. Okay, there we go. He was a pastor's kid, and he takes on the things of the church in a comedic way. You know, one of them was, and I was sharing at my birthday party yesterday, you know, people, first timer, you invite somebody who's never been to church before, and they walk in and they go, and we're all washed in the blood. And in the video, he turns around and he walks the other way and he goes, time to call the police. And we think it's not that we're not washed in the blood, but we think everybody speaks our language, and they don't. So this research is valid in my mind, and it's valid because I know George Barna. I interacted with him back in the mid '90s, and he is a survey company. Basically, he's a believer, and he has spoken up against the things that don't do well for the church and ministry, and he's spoken up and he's been bashed many, many times, but he consistently and continues to follow the pathway that the Lord has had him on. So he did this research, and it talks about the church, and it talks about the the, the well documented challenges that we face, and we have to come to grips that we can't live in the dark. When we don't understand what someone thinks about us, it's okay to say, me and the Lord, I don't care. But if my behavior is causing issues, or my way of doing something is causing issues, I have to be honest enough with myself to weigh it out. And as a church leader, I have to weigh it out and say, okay, guys, you don't have to agree with me, but this is where we're going, because our mission is tied to the apron strings, if you will, of Jesus. Jesus desires that all would come to a knowledge of him, that they would all discover their identity, that they would all see the person of Christ revealed in their life, that they would have revelation and wisdom, Paul says in the book of Ephesians, about the person or the persona of Christ. And so George Barna's group, called Barna Cities, came up with this great divide. And this great divide between what the church thinks, what the church believes, what the church thinks is going on. I want to say this, that I am limited by my culture. My wife was sharing with somebody the other day, I don't remember the circumstance, but in a nutshell, my wife and I not only are biologically the opposite, but we are like worlds apart in our thought process. You know, um, she's black and I used to be the black and white guy, but she's more black and white than I am, and part of it's her gift mix and the way she processes, but culturally we're worlds apart. I came from a large city in Connecticut. My wife came from a small little community, and I mean small little community in Vermont. Our family upbringing was different. Our financial upbringings were different. Um, all those things were different. And the Lord, in his humor, somehow brings us together. And so we've had gaps. We will be married 29 years this year. This is the third marriage for both of us. If that spooks you, I'm sorry, but it is what it is. We've made 29 years, and we've made 29 years despite our differences. We fully believe that God is the God who hates divorce and separation. If we're divorced, it doesn't mean he hates us. He hates the process. People have come to me time and time and time again about divorce, and I'm just going to tell you what Jesus said. You're divorced because of the hardness of your heart. You don't have to agree with that. You don't have to like it. You don't have to argue with me about it because it's not my words. You can choose to tear that page out of your Bible. Um, but this gap that my wife and I have had, we've had to learn how to communicate, sometimes at the top of our lungs, but we've had to learn to communicate and communicate so the other person understands. Now, there's nothing more frustrating to people where you know what you're saying, but the other person doesn't get it. So, because of our cultural differences, I can tell you my wife used this word very, very early on in our marriage. And I was like, I'm just going to tell you that word doesn't mean what you think it means. I wasn't being mean spirited, but it didn't mean, that wasn't the definition of it. And so when she said it, it really trashed me. And so over time, we've had to look at how our cultural differences are, biological difference, all those things that come into a marriage, parenting styles, how we were brought up, all those things. But there was a gap. And the church has a gap between us and the non-believer. And it was outlined, as I say, in this survey. So essentially, the gap is this. The younger you are, and the more unchurched you are, the less favorably you see the church. The older and the more churched you are, the more favorably you see the church. So when I tell that to people my age are going, yeah. And I'm like, they don't understand because you didn't communicate. You didn't communicate to them the need for Christ in their life. You took the rules and the regulations, you put on your Pharisaical, hat, and you began to tell them how to fix it, but you didn't tell them who the fix was that would require them. That wouldn't have a requirement other than, hey, Jesus, I'm here. And so when my wife, because of her culture, or me because of my culture, this isn't a pointing fingers thing, it's just because of our cultures, whatever our culture or whatever our paradigm is, when my wife struggles with where I'm at, or I struggle with where she's at, she or I, depending on the circumstance, will find it harder to reach the place we want to reach. And so it is with the church. If the church is trying to reach out to a group of people who want nothing to do with them, we have a problem. And not just in Houston. If you don't get that, Houston, we have a problem was a NASA reference. And I probably just dated myself because I imagine that's like 35 or 40 years old. So this data, as it accumulates and has accumulated, as this writer put, the verdict is in. We know what unchurched people think of the church, and it's not good. And so it's hard if okay, here's marriage 101. We are not mind readers. I know there's a perception by some spouses that the other spouse is a mind reader, but I will ask my wife 100 times till Sunday if she's okay about something if I'm thinking that she's not okay. And I can't work on an issue between us if I don't know what the problem is. The church cannot work on an issue if they do not know what the problem is. And so this writer and this survey company, they're not piling on to what's already out there on the internet, that's already appearing in documents, because these guys have lived their life in the church. They're devoted to God and his people. But if we don't listen to what they have to say, we have a problem. Perhaps you have cognitive dissonance. You say, Lee, I don't have a problem. Please stay in there with me, because just because you or I may not have a problem, people have a problem. I look at my statistics. It's real easy to look at statistics in the church when you actually physically are meeting, because people are either there or they're not. But when you're online and you're doing this kind of sharing, this kind of message, this kind of teaching, this kind of whatever we want to call this, you can see where people check out. It'll say they stayed in 37 seconds or they stayed in 37 minutes. And I'll go look, what did I say at 37 minutes that made them pull the plug? Because I need to know the problem. I'm not going to super analyze it. I just want to go, what did I say? I have a funny feeling I'll find something about the divorce statement and I'll be able to see people pull the plug. But I'm sharing truth that has worked in my life and the lives of many, many others. I shared those people that have wrote to me, with the exception of my lady friend, missionary who travels to Belize. All the rest of them have been married and are. And and so I see what works in people's lives. Do I think people make mistakes? Of course I do. So as as I said, as we go on, the data accumulates and we see what people think. So here's the first one in this survey. Who's thinking what about local churches? That's the question. 21% of the unchurched world have a positive perception of the church. 21%. If you know 10 people that don't go to church, only 2 of them may have any degree of respect or have a warm, fuzzy feeling towards what they know to be the church. Think about that. That's pretty scary, isn't it? Now, I can give you the survey, and I can tell you, I can tell you the group breakout, whether it's male or female, millennials, all those things. But what I'm going to tell you more than anything else is the overriding truth of this survey, in this particular instance, tells us that 21% of the people that don't go to church or don't consider themselves part of the church, because I don't like that statement, go to church. I'm not parsing words, I'm saying. And so therefore, we have a struggle. Now, ironically, not ironically, this is the great divide, right? 80% of practicing Christians have a positive view of the church. That's hugely different. That is a 60% difference. If this was a political election, we wouldn't be asking for a recount. Those who attend a fellowship on a regular basis appreciates what the church does for them and for others. And I appreciate what the church has done for me. My friends that were here, my friends that reached out to me yesterday, I was going through Facebook, and I know I don't have to, but I had hundreds and hundreds of messages to respond to. 7 o'clock last night, the last person left my home, and I put something together, whatever, got a water, sat down, and just shut myself off from the world and began to write to each and every person and say, thank you. Thank you for participating in my life. Thank you so much. And I do that because I believe that it's about acts of kindness. So the challenge is that only 1 out of every 5 non-believers or unbelievers see it that way. Just the other day, I had to deal with something. A friend of mine, unbeliever, relationship of his, like relative of his, made a post about how Christians had done them wrong. It made national news. Come on, guys. We're better than this. We're better than this. And so that's a huge barrier when we're trying to connect to a people who don't know. Um, if you had asked me before I read this survey, I think I concur with this uh, person. I probably would have said, in the city that I live in, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, I'm going to come in at a 3 to a 5. After reading this, the author says, guys, we're starting at a -5 to -8. You can blame this on the culture. You can blame this on the media. You can blame this on Facebook. You can blame this. The church, it has a responsibility to rise up above the culture and determine the culture in the best method of showing who Christ is to each and every person. They just do. And so I can bridge that gap. And I know that nothing is impossible with God. But first, I have to realize how big a difference there is. Here I am, 8 out of 10. Most of the people I know that are believers on a regular basis probably believe the church is good 80% of the time. Then I got to go to the group that thinks we're not. And I need to know not just how big the gap is and believe God for the solution and the resolution, but I can't start where I would with these people, where I start with these people. And these people I need to build a relationship with. So we're at a huge deficit, church. And this isn't a prophetic problem, any of that. It's like, it is time for us to manifest the goodness of God and bless those who do not like us. I had somebody tell me the other day, I'm going to get a gun, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, because Jesus doesn't really mean what he says he means when he says turn the other cheek. I'll just leave that one there. The next part has to do with myself as a church leader. 50% of non-Christians in America do not trust church leaders. They use the word pastor. I never use that word in reference to myself. I believe in the fivefold ministry as depicted in the words of Paul, in Paul's words in the book of Ephesians in chapter 4, where it says Jesus ascended, he left behind apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. So what was some of the problem? Let's see. Pastors in my community have been great leaders during the COVID pandemic. Pastors in my area have been great leaders when it comes to racial justice. Wow. So people are looking to see how we define justice and where do we put our money where our mouth is. I get there's some of you when I say this, I have black family members. My brother has black grandchildren. I have a black son-in-law and a brown grandchild. We'll just put it that way. I'm not minimizing them. He calls me on Father's Day. I love him. So when he's concerned about his life being endangered because he dresses like a white person, but he can't because if a black person wears a hoodie and the church says all lives matter, yes, they do. But when we use that to rebut Black Lives Matters, we have missed where the church needs to stand. Please think I'm not naive. I know there's a Black Lives organization, and I know we can find black people who stand up and say nothing bad has happened to me. I watch it. But that's not my job. My job is to say, what would Jesus do, or what did Jesus do, and not what would Jesus do today, but what did Jesus do then that I can utilize today and make it work in my community for those of color? Or somehow we felt it was all upon us to go after anybody that suggested a vaccination or that COVID was real or any of that stuff, instead of saying we will stand with people who are afraid, and we will go and we will lay hands upon the sick and we will recover. No, we made it political in so many instances. And we missed this whole group of people that were afraid, that were fearful, that were believing on science. Whether it was flawed or not is not the issue. Science is fluid, guys. Science is fluid. And so this gap over COVID was huge. And this gap over racial justice was huge. 85% of believers trust their leaders. What does that say about the other 15%? Less than half of unbelievers or non-Christian, we'll just use that word, feel the same way. They don't see it the same way. There's a 30-point gap between how Christians perceive and how non-Christians perceive local leaders. I will do anything and lay down my life for a believer or an unbeliever. It doesn't matter to me. Being able to trust leaders is important, because without trust, everything breaks down. And people don't follow leaders they don't trust. I have people in my life who struggle with my position on the pandemic, struggle with my position on racism or racial justice, and I don't care, because it's the heart of the Father. It's not just what I read, it's the heart of the Father to love all people. But when you have a group that's being neglected, for instance, Black Lives, when you have a group that's being neglected and the church just poo-poos it because, hey, we don't have any Black people in our church. Huge struggle. Huge struggle. You and I need to be able to uplift the oppressed, in this case, people of race, perhaps, or I'm describing it that way, and not destroy the oppressor. So it's really tough for me sometimes when I see people struggling under the bonds of injustice. And there's a part of me that wants to go destroy the people that are saying stupid things. Okay. So millennials, our favorite topic if you're my age. It's usually to denigrate them. A millennial, if you're familiar with the term but you don't know what the age group is, it's 22 to 36. And Gen X, which is most of my kids, is 37 to 55. And I share that so millennials think that the church is irrelevant, that it's hypocritical, that it's only known for what it's against, that it's detached from real issues, and it's judgmental. That same group of people, those two groups, the millennials and the Gen X's, which covers 22 to 55, they think that Christian leaders are out of touch with the needs of the community. They don't know any leaders personally. They think they're only focused on growing their church and not on community transformation. Wow! Didn't Paul say, I have influence in my metron? Did he go to speak to Lee's church and George's church? I don't want to use names of other leaders, and John's church and Sally's church. No, no, he came in and called it the Church of Corinth, the Church of Ephesus, the Church of Philippi, the Church of Colossus. And so we also have had to deal with the stories of what leaders have done. And get this, those millennials that actually do fellowship, they have a really low opinion of the church at large. Not a huge, I mean, not low like compared to the unbeliever or the non-believer. So these millennials were slightly more, they were just barely more likely to think of church leaders as hypocritical and judgmental. They're twice as likely as my generation to think that their church is detached from the real issues. When we first started Abundant Grace, I had 2, maybe 3 young people that were in the 20s that participated in helping us begin to do what we do. There is a real generation gap, but why? If you care about your community, which I do, it's important to me to show evidence of that. I mentioned early on that part of our giving, part of the giving that we receive, goes out in the form, in financial form, as well as in one case, we have a family who's brought together the youth, and they prepare a meal once a week for 100 people at our local homeless shelter. We financially give to that homeless shelter. We financially give, as I mentioned earlier, to a local organization that works with the people who are in recovery. So can we just begin to accept, and these are his words, but I want to use them. The church has been harsh, judgmental, exclusionary, and too often abusive. These are not the qualities that people should expect from believers, but too often those are exactly what have been shown to them. Lee, you're always on the church. Okay. No, I'm on the church, if you will, to begin to focus on the things that matter. We can have killer music. We can have all the greatest hardware. But if our software, if our internal thinking isn't focused on helping people, we're going to lose this game. It's not about better PR. It's about changing our lives. It's not getting mad at non-Christians who don't see the better side of the church. You know, people say that to me all the time. Well, you don't know this person. Usually speaking about government leaders. I'm like, right. And I'm an outsider looking in, and the only thing I see is the detrimental results. So I want better leaders. Well, that person did this. You know what? I think if we respond, if somebody tells us a negative about something, we respond about what's positive with it. It doesn't make us a positive person. Okay? I study positivity a lot. I actually just joined a new group that I'm going to begin. It's called Positivity Reset. And it's a guy I've never met, lives in California. He invited me to this group. I'm going to participate in this group because if there's any degree of toxicity in my life, some of it that may have happened because of COVID, I want to deal with it. I want to deal with me. And because I'm a church leader, I want to deal with us. I want us to become all that we believed for. You know, my friend who's in Belize, she's a great lady, and I love her dearly. But if you think her or any other friend of mine who's in ministry or believer disregarded somebody or dissed somebody in a restaurant or a grocery store, I would take them aside and have words with them, not yell at them. Like, really, dude? Like, is that how you really want to act? You want to yell at people? You knew that people, for instance, just the other day, my friend who's a restaurant owner, I've known him for 20 plus years. He's a great guy. I don't think he has anything to do with the church, and that's not the issue. The issue is that he finally felt it upon himself, incumbent upon himself, to make a post about, hey, if you're going to come to our restaurant, knowing that we're taking care of business as fast as we can, and all you want to do is go after our staff, please don't come. We love you, we care about you, you're part of the community, but we recognize that we can't meet all the needs. We can't. And, if you're going to go denigrate us on Yelp, whatever. Guys, there's this gap between unbelievers or non-believers and who we are. Did they hate us? I don't know. Bible says love our enemies, right? It says, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I will tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be the sons of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun, S-U-N, to rise on the evil and good and sends rain on the righteous and the unjust. Proverbs 19:11, good sense makes one slow to anger, and it is glory to overlook an offense. 1 Peter 3:16, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. Let me say, your good behavior, not you're a jerk in the restaurant behavior. Ephesians says, instead be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, just as God through Christ has forgiven you. 1 Peter 3:9, do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless. For this you were called, that you may obtain a blessing. And finally, Romans 12:14, bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse them. Guys, we have a reality check. Let's do something with it. Let's just not gloss over it. Let's just not play our music louder or play more worship or stand there. Let's get involved. Let's become active participants. Christianity is not a spectator sport. It's as much upon me as it is upon you to change the world we live in. Does prayer change the world? Yes. But you know what else changes the world? Acts of faith and good works. Faith without works is dead. So our works need to be relevant. They need to be real. I made the decision, regardless of my personal belief about the vaccine, I took people to get their vaccination. I took people to get their tests. I did all that. And not once did you hear me, especially with the non-believer, have a conversation about their lack of faith. That's not real. I have friends that got the vaccination or didn't get the vaccination, voted red or voted blue, or in my case, voted purple. Just kidding. Whatever those things are, we have a reality check that's been brought to us. And how we handle the reality check will determine what happens in the next generation. If you're my generation, you may well have grandkids. And if you have grandkids, you certainly don't want their lives to be worse. You don't. You don't want their lives, you don't want to believe for great persecution to come upon the land like some of the prophetic voices that are out there and some of the church leaders. You don't want to mock those that don't come to church. You don't want to mock those people who are fearful of going out of their houses because of COVID. Guys, you need to be there taking meals to their house, getting food to them, making sure that they are healthy, wealthy, and better off because you live in the community. So with that said, we're going to take communion. I want to remind us all that the cross is vertical, and it reminds me of the transcension, if you will, of God, his ascension, and where I live. I'm seated in heavenly places, high above principalities, powers, and rulers of darkness. I have no understanding why so many struggle with the fact and think the devil is alive and well and doing destruction, except when you believe that, you participate in that. All authority has been given to you and me. If I learned one thing in one song that we sang in my first church was, all authority has been given here. And then, as I said earlier, the horizontal plane, if you will, of relationship that Jesus took upon frail humanity. He took on the life that you and I lived, and he empowered us, and he gifted us, and he forgave us in that moment. He taught us about forgiveness. So let's take communion. On the night that Jesus was betrayed, hey guys, he still gave communion to Judas. Hey guys, he still washed his feet. Hey guys, maybe that's something we can learn from. Took the bread, and he said, this is my body, given unto you. And in like fashion, he took the cup. He said, this is my blood, signifying a new covenant, a covenant where goodness has been revealed in you, in me. Guys, there will always be that degree of persecution that comes, but don't let persecution come because of the wrong reasons. Don't let it come because you've decided to be a jerk. The Bible has a lot to say in the book of Matthew, and you can read it yourself, about calling your brother Raka or stupid. So Father, I pray for those that have hung in here, listen to this. I pray, Lord God, that your goodness is realized in their life. And I want to pray for healing to come in your life. There are those of you who are watching, you need healing. Healing, you know, if you're getting older, hey, arthritis, everybody thinks that's part of the package. I personally don't think that, and I don't think Jesus did. He died as much for arthritis and a head cold as he did for cancer. So let us begin to pray in faith. Yesterday we had a young woman at my party, and she had broken her foot, and I prayed for her. And I'm going to continue to pray for her. There are people that watch this that have cancer. God, deliver them from cancer. Bless them with healing. Bless them with wholeness. Reveal yourself. You don't deserve these things. People say, well, they smoked cigarettes for 120 years. Stop. We're not in the karma game. Our spirituality even transcends the science game. So don't argue on the field. I believe in science, but don't get stuck on it. Go to the Father. You are a priest, a high priest. Bring goodness into their life. Father, I thank you for each person. And I ask you, Lord God, just to touch down in their lives today, to bring blessing to them and bring health and healing. I love you guys. Oh, I got to say this. July 18th, we're going to be at the Best Western here in Keene. If you're in the area, I invite you to come. But that's where we're going to be. We're going to do our first meeting that's outside of a home in the last year. Want to see how it goes. If you're part of our fellowship and you have some insight or you want to participate on some level, I want to hear from you. It's not about a building, it's about a people. I love you guys. God bless you.